world from there. But God didn't understand the people were going to kill him, so God had to come up with an alternate plan. And the church was an alternate plan. So the church will exist for a period of time, and then Jesus will rapture the good people, and then there'll be 1,000 or maybe a trip. They don't even know what they believe. Pre-trib, post-trib, all that stuff. But eventually Jesus will come back to a temple and rule from Jerusalem. Does that make sense?
That's the 1,000 years.
The 1,000-year reign. Does that sound like what's being talked about here? But because of that time period from AD 30, when Jesus is crucified, not 33, I'm sorry, but AD 30 and AD 70, 40 years later, when Jerusalem's destroyed. But the prophecy's back here. It's going to happen. And when Jesus told the people, when you see the abomination of desolation, it was talked about where? Book of Daniel. What are they supposed to do? Run. If you're on your rooftop, get off and run. Don't go into your house to get anything. Just run. If you're out in the field working, don't go back into town. Run. That's not the end of the world, is it? Because it's just the end of the world is the end of the world. You're not going to go anywhere anyway, except up or down. Yes. Okay, but you're following. I hope so. So it's included in the 70 weeks due to Jesus' prophecy of the coming event. Do we need to go to 24, Matthew 24, 1 and 2? We've talked about it before. They're saying, here are these buildings. Look at the stones and stuff. Now, at the beginning of Jesus' ministry, it was what? 46. This has been. It's been 46 years. When Jesus said, "Destroy this temple, and I'll rebuild it in 3 days," they thought he was talking about the temple, the Heron, all of that, and they said, "It's been 46 years that we've been building this, and you're going to build it in 3 days?" He was speaking about his body, right? So that happened in 26 AD at the beginning of Jesus' ministry. If you take 46 years back, that's about 19 BC, when Herod starts the rebuilding of the temple. I'm going to give you the information ahead of time. You'll understand it later. But in 19 BC, you know what Herod did? He destroyed the temple. What do you do before you construct? You destruct. And it took them until about 7 BC to build the naos, the holy place and the most holy place. Follow me? 26, AD 26, they finish all the other buildings around. But in 7, they finish the naos temple, and they can offer sacrifices and they can do the rituals there. Who's born in 6 BC? John and Jesus. Isn't that amazing? Don't you find that amazing? I'm sorry I took that little bite. We're going to deal with it again. I know I've got it somewhere, but that's, is that the foreknowledge of God to know what was going on and what was going to happen, to be able to put that there, 400 years earlier. Astonishing. Astonishing.
That's why he's God.
So was this prophecy conditional about the destruction of Jerusalem? Could Jerusalem and Judea have been spared if, after initial rejection and killing of the Messiah, the Jews had overwhelmingly turned to Jesus and the new covenant? That's a thought question. It's moot because we know it didn't happen, but could they? If on the day of Pentecost, instead of, 3,000 or 5,000? What if the whole city repented and said, Christ is King, this temple is done for, we're following Christ, and then boom, all of them converted? Do you think maybe Jerusalem might have been spared?
It's too late. It's already laid out.
I know it's a moot point, but I'm saying, could Jerusalem and the nation have been spared? Because there's so much it's conditional. But think about it. What would have happened if they had returned? It's like, what would have happened if the South won the Civil War? What would have happened if Germany and Japan won World War II? How would life be different? We know it's a moot point because, but just think about it. How would things be so different? And it's not changing that Christ would be sitting on a throne in the physical city of Jerusalem and temple worship. No, we'd be worshiping like we do. It's just how the world would change. But again, thought question. All right. So, Daniel chapter 9, verse 26, the last part. Its end shall come with a flood. Not a literal flood, but a prophetic, figurative flood. And to the end there shall be war. Desolations are decreed. What does that say? Desolations. Not one, many desolations. And that's according to Jesus' prophecy also. I think we've got one more slide here. So, what happens? Verse 27. He shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week. And for half the week he shall put an end to sacrifice and offering. On the wing of abomination shall come one who makes desolate until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator. So, he shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week. Come on. Did I go back 1 or 2? He shall make a strong covenant with the many for 1 week, and for half the week he shall put an end to sacrifice and offering. So, Christ's ministry begins in 26, AD 26. For 3.5 years he preaches, he teaches, and he's killed. Crucified. Crucified, buried, resurrected, ascends to heaven. What happens 3.5 years later? Conversion of Cornelius. Gentiles are brought into the church. Things happen very quickly. I know, like in the book of Acts, scholars will say, oh, that happened 10 years later, 20 years later. No. Paul coming into the church, conversion of Paul, that probably happened within the first year, maybe 6 months. That happens very fast. So you got that 3.5 year period. He's cut off. Then you got 3.5 years that things happen. The church grows tremendously. But that next part's talking about what's going to happen later. Okay? In 63, AD 63, Roman General Pompey captures Jerusalem. Why does he capture Jerusalem? Because they've been causing trouble. Okay. Not bad trouble, but bad enough. The Roman authorities allow them to have localized government and religious freedom. But because of oppressive taxation and infiltration of polytheism, that leads to contention. In other words, they're bringing in the Roman gods, just like the Greeks had done at the time of Antiochus Epiphanes. We studied a little bit about that. They want to make the temple a temple to, what was their main god was either Saturn or Jupiter. I think Saturn. Make it a temple to Saturn. And the Jews are just going crazy. You can't do that. They're taxed, they're oppressed, they got this stuff going on. So they begin a war. In 66 through 73, you have what's called the First Jewish Revolt. First Jewish Revolt. You're going to have more even after Jerusalem's destroyed. They're going to be dispersed, but they're going to continue to fight. Emperor Nero sends General Vespasian to quash the rebellion. On the death of Nero in AD 69, Nero's the bad guy. Nero's a terrible guy. He declares himself to be a god. He's the one who burns most of Rome and blames it on the Christians. He's having Christians put in the Colosseums and killed and all, doing bad stuff. Crucifying them in the gardens and covering them with pitch and setting them on fire to provide light so they can have their parties and orgies and stuff. All right? That's how terrible he is. But on his death, Vespasian becomes emperor and Titus becomes his commanding general. And I think there's a relationship that Titus might be his son. Then Daniel 9 verse 27, the second part of that says, on the wing of abominations, plural, shall come one who makes desolate. Okay? Now here's a quote, because we have to go to secular history. You've heard of Josephus, right? Okay. Josephus devotes 20 pages to a description of the sordid details of how a band of ruthless outlaw robbers took complete charge of the city, that's Jerusalem, along with the entire temple complex long before the Romans came. Catch that? And who committed wholesale barbarity, rapines, plunderings, and murders. Over 12,000 of the nobility being brutally put to death, in other words, crucified on the temple wall, okay, back to it, along with countless thousands of the common people. They even filled up the Holy of Holies itself with dead bodies. Well, why did they do that? To desecrate it. The robbers fell upon the people as a flock of profane animals and cut their throats in what place soever they caught them. So you talk about abominations and desolations. Here's something you should know. At that time, or this time, Josephus was actively working with the Romans and writing for the Romans. Josephus was like a general in the Jewish army. And when Pompey had first attacked, he led a contingent of soldiers up to the area that was Naphtali, or Naphtali, and fought against the Romans and got defeated and captured. So to save himself, you know what he did? He became a traitor. He turned himself over and, I guess, professed loyalty to the Romans. So they let him live. He was a smart man. He was an educated man. He knew the history. So he's writing the history of Israel, the nation. But when it comes to this part, it was robbers and thieves and criminals that come in and did this. Instead of saying what? It was the Roman soldiers who did all this stuff in Jerusalem. So it makes it suspect because of who he was and what he had done. It's not beyond conception that he substituted a band of ruthless outlaw robbers for the Roman army, who were ruthless and were said to have burned the temple so that they could take the stones out and get the gold that was melted down into the foundation. Titus would be the one who, in charge of the Roman army, makes desolate. Okay. But look at the last part of verse 27. Until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator. There's one who comes who makes desolate, but what? Until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator. If you're reading that at first glance, you say, oh, well, the desolator, that must be the Romans. So this is the Roman Empire didn't end until what, 472, 46, wherever. No. Who's the desolator? Jerusalem. The end is poured out on the desolator. Jerusalem and the Jewish nation is the desolator. Why? Go back to the first point. What was that? Their transgression was full. And the Lord, that's it. What did Jesus say on the cross? Remember? In Greek? To testify. No, to testify. It is finished. And you can take those things that we had up there at the beginning and go back. It is finished. And if it wasn't completely finished at that time, it was soon going to be finished, and this, the last, was being put in its place. And Daniel was sickened by it. You can understand why. If we had a vision of the end of the United States of America, would that sicken us? As much as we see the United States of America walking the wrong way even today, we'd still be sick, wouldn't we? Okay. I know. A little extra time, but that's a lot. That's a lot in history, isn't it? So, if you have a question, let's do it now. Yes?
Remind me why our calendar is off by 3 to 6 years.
Okay.
I don't remember exactly.
The calendars that had, yeah, and you can go back and I think if you would type in, because I know you do a lot on internet about Bishop Usher, I believe was his name. Up until, I forget exactly what date it was, everything went by, say, Ptolemy's calendar. So what he wanted to do was establish a calendar that began at the birth of Christ. So that's why you have BC, before Christ, and Anno Domini, AD, year of our Lord. When he did his calculations, he had to go to the Pope, because that's who was in control back then, and do it. It took him a long time, and he finally convinced the Pope to make that the official calendar of Christendom, I guess. But as the process was being completed, then he found that he made a mistake of about 6 years. And it was because of, I believe, Herod's death. Herod didn't die in AD 2, Herod died in 4 BC. So he goes back, he says, hey, I made a mistake, we need to change that, we need to adjust that by 6 years. Now, we've gone to all this trouble to change it, we're not changing it again. And that's the basis, that's kind of a little understanding of it. That's why that 6-year period just hangs there.
So going along.
Does that help?
That's a good way to put it, it just hangs.
It just hangs there. We know it, but what can we do about it?
Well, it's not significant.
So going along with that, because with my brain trying to add things up and so forth, Christ is born in 6 BC.
Mm-hmm.
He starts his ministry in 26 AD, which we're making 32 years old.
32 years old, or 33, somewhere
Yeah.
right in there.
Okay. Well, he preaches for another 3.5 years. They'd make him roughly 35, 36 years old.
Mm-hmm.
We've always been told that he died whenever he was around 33. So is
Right.
that where that 3-year difference thing comes in, is because of the miscalculation?
Because they want to start at AD 1 as his birth, and his crucifixion at AD 33. And his crucifixion at AD 33 is wrong also. He was crucified in AD 30. Because if you go back to Luke's statement about how long they were building the temple, Hebron, beginning in 19 BC, it brings you out to 26. He began his ministry in 26. 3.5 years brings you to 30 when he was crucified. The church was actually established in AD 30. I know all these cornerstones on buildings say AD 33, but that's because
I was trying to, all right, like, this is not adding up, and I could not figure out how to make it add up.
it doesn't. And I don't say it all to be confusing, but if you go back and you look at numbers, the biggest confusion out of this is that when we look at it and we put that period of time up to from AD 30 to AD 70, premillennialists want to put that way out in the future till Jesus comes back for 1,000-year millennial reign, and there's no reason to do that. You see what I'm saying? Just be aware of that in your studies. Okay? All right. Thank you for your time and attention.